My name is Byron Johnson. I direct the Institute for Studies of Religion here at Baylor University. And we're delighted that you could be with us here today to hear Stephen Monsma. Steve is a longtime friend of mine, and he's been connected to our work here at Baylor since I came here in 2004. But before that, when I was at the University of Pennsylvania, Steve was also a scholar associated with our program there. I hope you've had a chance to read his bio. I'm not going to read it. I don't want to take 35 of the 40 minutes that we have allotted for his lecture by reading his bio. Suffice to say that he is a world-class scholar and political scientist for many years at Pepperdine, and he's back at Calvin College for a second tour of duty. Steve is different than most of our colleagues in that he actually was a politician for a time and served in the Michigan legislature. And he just brings such standing in the academic community to the study of religion and politics. And he's been incredibly interested in the role of faith-based organizations. People left, right, and center hold him in the highest of esteem. And I happen to be one of those people that just marvel at the amount of work that Steve produces and the way in which it is received by so many people. So he is a giant in the field. He's here today to talk to us about his latest book, which I have right here and is on sale out front. So if you have a chance to pick it up, and maybe we could even get Steve to autograph a few. So it's my good pleasure to welcome a dear friend, Steve Monsma.
Well, thank you, Byron, for those very kind words, and thank you to all of you for both coming out and for the welcome you gave me today. As you can see on the screen, the topic of my talk, what I'd like to spend the next 35, 40 minutes talking about, and then we hope to have a Q&A, so if you have questions, keep them in mind, so at the end you can raise them. My topic, as you see, is do we truly believe in pluralism and diversity, faith-based organizations, religious freedom rights? Now, at first glance, it might be obvious that we as American society, of course we believe in pluralism and diversity. Go to almost any university's website and you'll find declarations of their commitment to diversity. For example, the other day I went to the UCLA website. It states, "We believe that diversity is critical to maintaining an excellence in all of our endeavors." Then I went to the University of Texas website. I figured I'd better get a Texas university in too. It has a statement from the president of the university stating, "Ours is a diverse learning community." For much of my career, I taught political science at Pepperdine University in the LA area. Its website declares, "Diversity not only enriches the educational endeavor, it is critical to it." In short, diversity has taken its place along with mom, apple pie, baseball, and Chevrolet as American icons that no one really questions. But I am going to argue today that when it comes to faith-based organizations and their religious freedom rights, we as a society suddenly are not quite so sure that diversity and pluralism really are good things. In the next 35, 40 minutes, these are the 4 points that I hope to cover and can explicate what I just said. First of all, I'd like to talk about the widespread existence and vital contributions of faith-based organizations in our society. In the process, you can get a better feel exactly what I mean by faith-based organizations. Secondly, I'd like to talk about the religious freedom rights of faith-based organizations as being under threat. From there, we'll go on to try to answer the question, well, why is this? What's the underlying problem? And I will argue it's the dominant mindset or set of assumptions that we as a society tend to make towards faith-based organizations and their nature. And then finally, I hope I can at least give the outlines of my answer to this problem, the outlines at least of a better answer. So first of all, let's turn to this first point of mine, the widespread existence and vital contribution of faith-based organizations in our society. And you can touch on several areas. This is true in education. I shouldn't have to dwell long on this. In the middle of the campus of Baylor University, a Baptist faith-based institution of higher learning. But of course, there's many examples of this nature. In the Catholic tradition, we can think of Notre Dame. Mormon tradition, there's Brigham Young University. In the evangelical Protestant tradition, there's places such as Wheaton College, Calvin College that I'm associated with now. Pepperdine University is associated with the Churches of Christ, as is Abilene Christian in Abilene, Texas. I could spend the rest of my time citing how in education there's many faith-based colleges and universities. And I haven't even touched about K through 12 schools in the Catholic tradition, in Lutheran tradition, in evangelical Protestant tradition. There's a host of K through 12 schools. In healthcare, I only have to mention there are some 600 Catholic hospitals scattered throughout the United States from coast to coast. And there's other hospitals and health clinics and a variety of other religious traditions. In overseas relief and development efforts, this is one area where we have a little better and more precise documentation because Rachel McCleary of Harvard's Kennedy School put out a book a few years ago which reports a very complete study of faith-based overseas relief and development efforts. She was able to identify 200 such programs in the United States with a cumulative annual budget of over $7 billion. Among these is World Vision, an evangelical Protestant agency which is the largest non-governmental overseas relief and development agency in the United States, with a budget of over $1 billion a year, with 40,000 employees in almost 100 countries around the world. And then there's the social services more generally. I've spent quite a bit of my time studying these various faith-based social service programs. I've visited many of them. There's community development associations. There's welfare to work programs. There's prisoner re-entry programs, drug abuse, homeless shelters, spouse abuse shelter, adoption and foster care agencies. Again, I could spend the rest of my time just ticking these off and telling stories about the good work that they do. And any of you from Dallas, I know I spent some time a few years ago studying these faith-based organizations in Dallas, especially Central Dallas Ministries is doing, I thought, a superb work there. Now, before leaving this, I would make one additional note, namely that these faith-based organizations are indeed religiously based and religiously oriented in some serious ways. This fact is illustrated by these two quotations that you see on the screen. The first is the mission statement of Bethany Christian Services, which is the largest faith-based adoption agency in the United States with offices in about 32 different states. Its mission statement reads like this: Bethany Christian Services manifests the love and compassion of Jesus Christ by protecting and enhancing the lives of children and families through quality social services. In the course of writing this book that Byron Johnson mentioned, I interviewed Joan Rosenhauer, who's one of the vice presidents of Catholic World Relief. I asked her, well, in what sense are you Catholic? What does it mean that this is Catholic World Relief? This is her answer. The leadership team is very conscious of our Catholic identity. The mission statement is based on Catholic social teaching. Every staff person must embrace the ideas that flow from Catholic social teaching, such as the value of all persons and support for the common good. We do training in this. All this is background to my second point. And I might add, before going on, that we'll come back to this religious nature of faith-based organizations, that it's real and important to them, even though it varies somewhat, from one faith-based organization to another. They define their religious nature differently, but that does not mean that their religious nature is inconsequential or unimportant to them. So with that, we can go on to my second point, a problem. The religious freedom rights of faith-based organizations are under threat. That is, they are facing threats to their ability to maintain their religious character and to act in keeping with it. These threats, for the most part, take one of two forms, and you see the two bullet points I have on the screen. The first of these is a threat to faith-based organizations' right to limit their staffs and other personnel to those in religious agreement with them, both in terms of what mentally they assent to and believe, and also in the sense of the religiously based behavioral standards to which they hold. Earlier, you remember I mentioned World Vision as the largest non-governmental overseas relief and development agency in the United States. It requires, as an evangelical Protestant agency, it requires all of its staff members to sign a statement of faith that indicates they agree with the basics of the Christian faith as they have traditionally been understood. Several years ago, when 3 of its staff members stated they could no longer agree with the statement of faith, World Vision let them go. They in turn brought suit in the federal courts claiming that World Vision is not really a religious, but it's a humanitarian organization, and thus could not hire and fire staff without violating federal civil rights laws. Could not hire or fire based on religious grounds, of course, without violating federal civil rights laws. Now, World Vision eventually prevailed, but it had to go through first the federal district court and then the federal court of appeals, which by a close 2-to-1 vote sided against the employees and World Vision. Another example I can take deals with on-campus student organizations and their right to limit their leaders to persons who are in religious agreement with them. In other words, should an on-campus Jewish organization, for example, be able to require their leaders to be Jews who accept the basic tenets of their faith? And should on-campus Christian or Muslim student clubs be able to do the same? San Diego State University has withdrawn official recognition from 2 student religious groups because they insisted upon religious standards for their leaders. These student groups no longer have the on-campus privileges other student organizations enjoy. Christian student organizations have faced the same threat at Tufts, Vanderbilt, and other secular campuses. In a case that went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, at the Hastings College of Law in San Francisco, the Supreme Court ended up upholding its policy of requiring all campus student organizations to accept, even for leadership positions, all persons who wish to join, an all-comers policy as it was termed. Thus today, the student chapter of the Christian Legal Society at Hastings Law School no longer has on-campus privileges all other student organizations there enjoy. To me, to my thinking, it's as wrong to require, say, a Christian student club to accept as leaders persons who are not Christian, as it would be to require a Republican student club to accept a Democrat as its leader, or a gay and lesbian club to accept an outspoken opponent of gay rights as its leader. If an organization cannot control who its leaders and its staff are, it is in danger of ceasing to exist as an organization dedicated to a certain belief or cause. And when religious beliefs and religiously rooted standards of behavior are at stake, the religious character of an organization is threatened. We can go to the second bullet point you see on the screen. Namely the second threat to the religious freedom rights of faith-based organizations arise when government regulations require or bring pressure to bear on a faith-based organization to provide services that violate its own religiously based beliefs. For example, several states have required one or more adoption and foster care agencies to place children with same-sex couples on the same basis as they do single parents or traditional mother-father couples. As a result, several Catholic charity agencies in Massachusetts and Illinois and an evangelical Protestant agency in Illinois have stopped doing adoption and foster care placements rather than violate their religiously based beliefs that they ought not to place children with same-sex couples. Another example, and here in getting to this, let me ask all of you a question. How many of you have heard of the current controversy over attempts by the Obama administration to require all employers, including Catholic and other religious employers, to provide contraceptive coverage for their employees in their insurance plans? This has been in the news. How many of you? Yeah, most of you have heard of that. This whole controversy, which has been in the news almost daily. The Wall Street Journal this morning just had a op-ed column on this. This controversy was sparked when the Obama administration issued a regulation that would require almost all faith-based organizations outside of churches themselves to offer contraceptive services in any health care plans they cover for their employees. And contraceptives were defined broadly enough to include certain drugs that do not simply prevent conception, but cause very early abortions, at least in the eyes of some religious traditions. As a result, many Catholic and some evangelical Protestant organizations were being put in a position where they either must violate their religious conscience or stop providing health care coverage to their employees, which in turn would result in heavy fines. Following the outcry that this action ignited, the Obama administration offered a compromise. They backtracked a bit, which created an exemption that apparently will cover most faith-based organizations, such as those I'm talking about, those that have religiously based objections to providing contraceptive coverage. Faith-based organizations covered by this exemption will not be forced to provide contraceptive coverage to their employees, but their insurance carriers will have to provide contraceptive coverage at their own, not the faith-based organization's expense. The details have yet to be worked out, and as the old saying goes, the devil is in the details. In fact, on February 10, the original proposed rules were officially promulgated with only promises that they will later be modified to effect the compromise that I just described. Also, some faith-based organizations may understandably feel they are indirect paying for contraceptive coverage, since this cost may end up being hidden in what they pay for their insurance policies. A very real threat remains that some faith-based organizations will be forced to act in violation of their religious beliefs. This issue continues to roil the political waters in Washington. Only last week, the Senate turned down an amendment by Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri that sought to overturn the Obama administration's directive. At this point, though, before going on, I wish to pause to make 2 points clear. One is, the issue I am raising today is not whether it is right or wrong for faith-based organizations to take the specific stands that they are. The issue is not whether it is right or wrong for faith-based and adoption and foster care agencies to refuse to place children with same-sex couples. I suspect there are different opinions on that issue right here in this room. And my thinking that's okay. Nor is the issue whether or not it is wise for an on-campus religiously based student club to insist on certain belief and behavioral standards for its leaders. I can understand how some student on-campus religious organizations might decide to welcome all students, even into leadership positions. Nor is the issue whether the Catholic Church is right or wrong in its opposition to what it considers artificial birth control. I personally happen to disagree with the Catholic Church on this issue. Instead, the question I am trying to raise today is whether or not religiously based organizations have a right to determine for themselves what beliefs to hold to and then to act on the basis of those beliefs. I answer that question with a yes. To me, that is what religious freedom rights are all about. A second point I need to make clear is that diversity and organizations' freedom of belief and action are inescapably linked. They go together. Societal pluralism on the one hand and freedom of belief and action for ethnic, religious, racial, regional, and other societal groupings on the other hand are indeed linked. If we as a society are to have a rich pluralism, we must allow ethnic, racial, regional, and yes, religious groups in society the freedom to be who they wish to be, even when who they are and what they believe and what they do may run counter to majority desires or beliefs. A true pluralism moves far beyond talking about and extolling diversity to genuinely respecting and tolerating those whose beliefs and practices run counter to one's own deeply held beliefs and practices. In this light, it's more than a little ironic that San Diego State University, that I mentioned earlier, is banning the two student religious clubs from campus, proudly devotes on its website an entire tab to its commitment to promoting diversity. Clearly, its commitment to diversity does not extend to religious diversity. Well, this then brings me to the third point of my lecture this afternoon, namely the mindset that is dominant in our society today, a mindset that is leading to the threats to the religious freedom rights of faith-based organizations I've just been talking about and seeking to illustrate. One might suppose that the reason faith-based organizations are facing the sort of threats I just described is that there's a war on religion going on in the United States. And, especially some politicians have claimed this. Namely, that there are evil persons who hate all religion and are self-consciously seeking to limit and undercut its influence in society. Now, there may be some of this, but I believe the chief reason lies elsewhere. It's in a mindset or a set of assumptions and perspectives which have blinded those holding to this mindset to the damage they are doing to religious liberty. This mindset tends to dominate American thinking. It's found in liberal advocacy organizations, many major universities, and the editorial offices of the New York Times, CNN, and other major news organizations. There are two aspects or steps to this mindset. Again, the two bullet points you see on the screen. The first is the belief, or better, the assumption, since it is often not really thought through, the assumption that religion is a purely private matter found in churches, synagogues, mosques, and other religious congregations, and in the prayers and religious rituals and observances that are conducted in those religious buildings and religious congregations. Also included would be the individual private prayers and devotional readings we as individuals and families engage in the privacy of our own homes. Under this point of view, it is religion of this nature that the First Amendment was designed to protect. And I would suggest almost all Americans, certainly in theory and almost always in practice, are willing to defend vigorously freedom of religion of this sort. And this is good. However, seeing religion as protecting only religion of a private, personal nature, and of religion taking place within the confines of religious congregations is a serious mistake and leads to the sort of threats to the religious freedom I discussed earlier. I will come back to that point in just a moment. But first, we need to go on to the second bullet point that you see on the screen, which is the second step or the conclusion to which this first aspect of the dominant mindset leads. It is the belief that when faith-based organizations provide services to the public, they are no longer truly religious, but more secular-like agencies. Religious organizations stop being religious when they enter the public realm to offer tangible, practical services to the public, and then the same rules that apply to all other organizations offering the same services also apply to them. Remember, world vision and they fired employees who claimed that World Vision was not a religious but a humanitarian organization. This position is particularly well illustrated by a 2002 study authorized by the American Civil Liberties Union. Look at this carefully. It's very revealing. When religiously affiliated organizations move into secular pursuits, such as providing medical care or social services to the public, they should no longer be insulated from secular laws. In the public world, they should play by public rules. Look carefully and think about this quotation, for as I said, it's very revealing. It puts forward two ways in which a religious organization can be turned into a non-religious organization. One, by providing supposedly secular services such as medical care and social services, and two, by offering these services not merely to their own members, but to the general public. Now, this mindset was recently on full display in connection with the Obama administration's directive I mentioned earlier dealing with contraceptives. This directive did initially provide for a religious exemption for those whose consciences would forbid them from providing such services. But a huge problem remained, which, as we're saying in a moment, the Obama administration has at least partially responded to. But the huge problem that initially remained was that this religious exemption was rooted in the view of religion as limited to religious congregations and their core religious practices and rituals conducted for their own members. Look at this screen. The religious exemption applied only to organizations that met all four of the following criteria. Its purpose is the inculcation of religious values. It primarily hires persons who share the organization's religious tenets. It primarily serves persons who share those tenets. And fourth, it is a religious congregation or its direct auxiliaries, associations of congregations, etc. Clearly, this exemption was crafted to protect the religious freedom rights of churches and other religious congregations. But the Obama administration initially saw no need to protect the religious freedom rights of non-church, faith-based schools, hospitals, adoption agencies, and other such service organizations. In doing so, in some ways we shouldn't fault the Obama administration, I do, but not all that much, because in doing so, it followed the dominant American mindset that sees them as not being truly religious entities. But by entering the public realm of health, education, and social services as having left the religious realm for the secular humanitarian realm. Since then, President Obama has backtracked and now recognizes that religious liberty is indeed an issue and therefore attempted a compromise that partially, but only partially, meets the threat to the religious freedom rights of faith-based organizations, as we described earlier. But the fact that he initially had only the very narrow religious exemption I described here, and the fact that it was praised by leading liberal organizations such as the ACLU and by major papers such as the New York Times, is revealing of the strength of the mindset I just described in American society today. Now, maybe all of you students at Baylor do not need to hear this next point, but my problem with this, but I'm going to say it anyway, just in case there's one or two that need it. My problem with this mindset is that it's simply factually inaccurate. The public-serving nature of religion is a fact, as I say on this screen. It is simply inaccurate to say that when the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. led African-American demonstrators in the 1960s out of their churches and into the streets in defense of racial justice, that he somehow magically changed from a religious leader to a secular leader. An official statement of the National Association of Evangelicals also testifies to its belief in the public nature of religion. Quoting, Jesus said that those who do not care for the needy and the imprisoned will depart eternally from the living God. from Matthew 25, which I find is the more frightening chapters in Scripture. You know, it's what the sheep and the goats, and you did not do it unto me, you have not done it unto one of the least of these. The public serving nature of religion was clearly summarized by the noted Harvard scholar Robert Bellah and his associates in their classic book, Habits of the Heart, when they wrote, quote, "Yet religion, and certainly biblical religion, is concerned with the whole of life, with social, economic, and political matters, as well as with private and personal ones." To insist otherwise is to say that Mother Teresa, when she went into the streets of Calcutta to care for the sick and dying, left religious work and became a secular social worker. Jesus Christ himself would have been surprised if he had been told that when he went about healing the sick and feeding the hungry, he was somehow no longer a religious teacher. In short, for most Christians, and for many other deeply religious persons, feeding the hungry, caring for the sick, and releasing those who are oppressed are as much religious acts as kneeling in prayer or receiving the bread and wine of communion. And to provide help and aid only to their own members would be a violation of their faith. It would be sinning against a God who cares for all who are in need. And when religious persons form organizations to fulfill these religious duties more effectively, they are forming organizations that are as deeply and profoundly religious as are their churches. And just contrast that, if you remember that quotation from the ACLU that referred to healing the sick and caring for the needy as being secular pursuits. This then brings me to my fourth point. Okay, if this is the problem, this is the cause of the problem, ta-da, what's the solution? And in the time we have, I can't give a complete analysis, a complete solution, and if truth were known, it's probably beyond my wisdom as well. But let me at least suggest the outlines of an approach, of what I consider certainly to be a better answer. And first, I would like to suggest a new mindset or new mentality that needs to replace the dominant mindset I just described. And then I will seek to apply this new mindset to the two threats to faith-based organizations' religious freedom that I described earlier. This new mindset is rooted in two key concepts that have played significant roles in Christian, social, and political thought. One is the Catholic teaching of subsidiarity, and the other is the Dutch neo-Calvinist concept of sphere sovereignty. Now, you may be relieved to know that I'm not going to try to go into the details of these concepts today. For that, you have to buy my book in back, a brief commercial. But in the time we have today, I can say this. Both developed in the late 19th and early 20th century and were seen as a third way in distinction from both the extreme individualism of classic liberalism, today we would call libertarian thought, and on the other hand, the collectivism and all-powerful state of socialist thought of that day. What we do have time for today, and is important to note, is that both the Catholic concept of subsidiarity and the neo-Calvinist concept of sphere sovereignty were, and today still are, in agreement on these 3 points. First is the intrinsic nature of intrinsic to the nature of human society is the host of God-intended communities, associations, and other social structures that make human flourishing and a healthy, well-functioning society possible. Think of families, of neighborhood associations, service clubs, churches, and the faith-based recreational, healthcare, and social service organizations, such as the faith-based organizations I've been talking about today. Second, many of these are faith-based in a genuine, profound way. We saw this earlier, and I'll come back to this point in a moment. Third, these possess an autonomy or an independence that is theirs as an inalienable right and that governments are bound to honor and respect. Again, I'll come back to that in just a moment. Based on these 3 ideas, the new mindset for which I'm calling has 3 aspects. which stand in contrast to the dominant mindset I described earlier. Here you see the dominant mindset on the right and the new one I'm calling for on the left. First, I would suggest we as a society need to recognize and take into account the multitude of intermediary social structures lying between the individual on the one hand and society as a whole or government on the other hand. These structures are crucial for a healthy, flourishing society. Today's mindset largely ignores these intermediary structures and sees government as the primary means by which society as a whole is able to advance and flourish. Even watch this as the presidential campaign goes on this year. The Democrats will tend to talk about societal-wide needs and why we need government programs, why Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act is needed. The Republicans will tend to say, no, we have to emphasize the individual, the free individuals. Neither one, I suspect, will talk very much about all of these intermediary agencies, educational, healthcare, social services, international relief and development agencies. This means that this new mindset needs to take into account, wrap its brain around this multitude of social structures that make this human flourishing possible and that do play such an important role in society. Second, going to the second bullet point, the new mindset sees faith-based intermediary social structures as being genuinely religious in a profound way. Faith-based organizations such as Baylor University right here, Notre Dame, World Vision that we've talked about, Catholic World Relief, which we also talked about, Catholic Charities, and Jewish Vocational Services are public serving organizations. Certainly, they are also religious organizations. They are means by which persons are living out the commands of their various faiths to educate the young, heal the sick, and help the needy at home and overseas. Meanwhile, today's dominant mindset, as we have seen, limits religion to religious congregations and their core religious rituals and to personal, private, devotional activities. The third aspect of the new mindset for which I'm calling sees faith-based organizations as possessing an autonomy or an independence, as we talked about just previously. Pressuring them to act contrary to their religious nature and beliefs is as much a violation of freedom of religion, I would suggest, as pressuring individuals or religious congregations to act contrary to their deeply held religious beliefs. In both cases, we are dealing with inalienable rights given by our Creator, not privileges dispensed by the government of the day. Yet today's dominant mentality believes, since it sees faith-based organizations as not being truly or deeply religious, that government and its public policies take precedent over what faith-based organizations claim are their religious freedom rights. Since they are not truly religious, they cannot, of course, have religious freedom rights. Before moving on to the application of this new mindset, as you see it outlined here, I need, however, to make two additional points. They are important to note. You see them here. One is that the autonomy for which of faith-based organizations I'm talking about is not a complete or an absolute autonomy, but a rightful or limited autonomy. Just as individual rights have certain limits on them, there are libel laws. I can't go out and say anything I want about anybody else. I could get sued for libel. And even as churches must meet certain building and fire codes, the exits must be properly marked, etc. So also there are some limits on the religious freedom rights and autonomy of faith-based organizations for which I'm calling, especially when issues of health and safety are involved, or when you're dealing with a religious congregation that might be calling for violent, illegal activities. It's not an absolute autonomy, it's a rightful, limited autonomy. Second, my second point you see here, there is an important counterpoint to what I've just discussed. Religious groups need to accept the beliefs and actions of other religions and of secularists. Freedom of action ought not to be claimed for oneself and one's organization and then denied to others with whom one disagrees. It is wrong, I would suggest, for the gay rights movement to attempt to force faith-based adoption agencies to place children with same-sex couples in violation of its religious conscience. But it would also be wrong if ever faith-based adoption agencies would seek to block same-sex adoptions by agencies that have no moral objection to them. That's the counterpoint. Going on then, if I've argued for this new mindset, okay, you may say that sounds good in theory. How do you apply it to some of the here and now issues that our society is facing? And how would it respond to what I have claimed are religious freedom threats that faith-based organizations are facing? First, I would suggest the right of faith-based organizations to limit their membership to those in religious agreement with them is important and should be honored. If faith-based organizations are indeed religious organizations, their right to determine the religious beliefs and standards of their members, leaders, volunteers, and paid staff must be protected. No one would dream of forcing a Catholic congregation to accept the Baptist as its preach. Even a fine Baptist is a graduate of Baylor here. But why do we sort of recoil at that? But for I say, if this is, because we all are agreed that a Catholic church is a religious organization, but what about Catholic charities? If this is the case, and if a Catholic charities agency is indeed religious, and if it believes it is important that its executive director, for example, be Catholic, which is often the case, a respect for its religious character means it has a right to take the religious membership, beliefs, and religiously shaped actions of its executive director into account. Okay, but going on to the second bullet point. But what about the right of faith-based organizations not to provide services that violate their religiously based beliefs? Here, the right of a non-Catholic employee of a Catholic faith-based organization to receive contraceptive services as a part of our health insurance coverage clashes with the right of the faith-based organization to live by its deeply held beliefs. Similarly, the right of a same-sex couple to adopt a child from a faith-based adoption agency clashes with the right of the agency to act on its belief in the immorality of same-sex relationships. In that case, whose right should take precedence? In most situations, happily, I believe it is possible to respect both the religiously based beliefs of the faith-based organization and the beliefs and desires of those asking for the services the faith-based organizations find to be in violation of their faith. What is seemingly impossible can be achieved by providing strong religious exemptions for faith-based organizations who are objecting to providing certain services government regulations are requiring, but also providing that the faith-based organizations must provide information on other agencies that are willing to provide those services. In this way, those requesting the services would show respect for the faith-based organization and its religious beliefs by not insisting that it has to serve them, and the faith-based organization would show respect for those demanding the services it believes cannot in good conscience provide by informing them of other organizations that are willing to provide them. To me, this is what pluralism and diversity is all about. No one is forced to act against their conscience. No one is unable to receive the services they desire. Now, let me give a concrete example of what I have in mind, because often when you get more concrete issues of questions may arise. At several points, I've mentioned, this ongoing struggle over the Obama administration's contraceptive mandate. Melissa Rogers of Wake Forest University, who's a friend of mine, has put forward a position that is very much in line with what I'm urging here today. You can go to her website, if you Google Melissa Rogers, Wake Forest, and so on, you'll get to the solution that she has put forward. She suggested that there be a strong religious exemption from the contraceptive mandate, one that would include hospitals, universities, and other public serving organizations that find contraceptive services morally objectionable. But faith-based organizations claiming this exemption would have to, first of all, inform their employees of this fact. Sometimes they might not otherwise even know this, and inform them of alternative ways they can obtain contraceptive coverage. Plus, their insurance carriers would be required to offer contraceptive coverage to the individual employees of organizations claiming this exemption, and to do so on the same cost basis as what the organization would have had to have paid for that coverage had it been included in its health insurance plan. But the individuals would have to pay for this additional coverage. It would serve as really a rider to the employer-provided health insurance plan. And in this way, no faith-based organization is forced to act contrary to its religiously informed conscience. No employee is denied the services she desires. Well, you've hung in with me very well here. And in closing, I would stress that the new mindset that I've been discussing is at the heart of what I'm urging on you today. I see that's the heart of the problem, and the old mindset is at the heart of the problem. The new mindset is at the heart of moving ahead. And that may seem easy for society to achieve, but I would suggest a mindset embedded in a society's history and culture, as I think the old dominant mindset is, that is usually a difficult thing to change. But there are at least some signs that change may be in the offing, and if we can ever learn to talk and truly listen to each other in thoughtful terms rather than in religious war terms, I am hopeful that what is difficult may in fact be achieved. I always like to end on an optimistic note, so that was my optimistic note for this lecture. Well, thank you so much for listening. How are we doing up time? We have some time for questions and answers. So, let go. Over here, first of all.
There was a 9-0 decision by the Supreme Court back in January regarding a case, I think the Lutherans. Can you summarize that for me real quickly?
Quickly anyway. This dealt with a Missouri Synod Lutheran school and one of its teachers. And this teacher I forget, the Lutherans have a category of between the ordinary layman and an ordained clergy. And she fell into that, and I forget the term right now, but she was more than just an ordinary layman, less than ordained clergy. Well, and she ended up getting in trouble with the school for a number of reasons, and brought suit against the school. And the school claimed that she had no right to bring a suit against it, and claiming that she had violated the terms of her contract, which, etc. And the Supreme Court went along with this, and it was surprising. In church-state issues, rarely does the Supreme Court ever have a 9-0 decision, but it did in this case. And to me, it was very encouraging. It reinforced the right of this Lutheran school to have control over its own faculty and to let someone go if she had violated what they saw anyway as the religiously based terms of her contract. Especially, some of this is coming back. It involved going into the secular courts rather than trying to settle the dispute internally. Now, what I did note, under the Missouri Synod Lutheran schools, the schools are part of the churches. In that sense, technically, they're not independent, freestanding schools. They're parochial schools. In the sense, they're part of the local church. In that sense, the court tended to see this as part of the Lutheran Church, plus her what I would call semi-clergy status in between ordinary laymen and clergy also played a role. So I think it was a positive decision, but it does not give a great deal of comfort to something like World Vision, which of course does not ordain persons. It does not preach the gospel, at least not directly overseas. It's a relief and development agency, even though from its point of view, it's doing so in the name of the church and the name of Jesus Christ. Sometimes these are called para-church organizations. And this most recent case has some comfort, but not a direct application to these parachurch or freestanding or faith-based organizations. Okay, anyone else? Yes, here.
Thank you. I had a question regarding the criteria that were used by that are used to define faith-based organizations that you had up on one of the PowerPoint slides, the 4 criteria, and it had to be all 4 of those.
Oh, yeah, under the Obama administration's original directive, yeah.
Yes, it struck me that those were largely applicable to pre-Vatican II types of organizations that were solely run by religious orders, religious groups, very, very heavily religious.
Exactly.
And society, I mean, the communities, those religious communities can't sustain that largely anymore. So were they written were they written by the Obama administration, or did the Obama administration inherit them from an earlier generation, do you know?
No, they really were written by HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services. And I think you're right. You look at them, and as far as they went, this was fine. They were trying to eliminate churches. Theological seminaries probably would have fallen under them, and you could question that, but probably. But they were oriented towards a religious congregation that was serving its own members, celebrating religious rituals and celebrations, etc., and did not come close even to, say, Baylor University or Notre Dame or Catholic Charities more generally, Bethany Christian, World Vision, etc. And that was the problem. And to me, it was so revealing, because I'm not one that says the Obama administration is engaging in war on religion. I mean, I voted for Obama. And, maybe I shouldn't admit that, but I just gained some of you, lost the other. But so I'm not coming out of this hate Obama kind of a mindset. But I think he and his administration, and obviously he didn't sit in the Oval Office to write, they came out of the Department of Health and Services and Sebelius, who heads it, but they were just doing what comes naturally. If you think in terms of a set of assumptions and perspectives that you can trace all the way back to our founding and through much of American history, but you apply these in an unthinking way, and I feel they have disastrous results for the religious freedom rights of many of these faith-based organizations, which play such a vital role in our society, both from the benefits that society enjoys and from the point of view as being ways in which members of the church or of the synagogues live out their faith in the world. Anyway, okay, over here. I think a mic is coming to you.
I just had a real quick question. I may have missed this at some point.
Sure.
Is there any kind of debate or talk going on about something like this going through Congress right now?
Yes, there is. I mean, I did mention very quickly in passing, just last week, the Senate voted on an amendment by Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri that would be more inclusive in terms of religious freedom rights. But but this gets us into another whole area. I was hoping no one would ask about this, and now I'm raising it myself. But what about for-profit businesses, or what about the pharmacist who has a moral problem dispensing birth control pills or an abortifacients and so forth, which his amendment would have been very broad. It was either those who have religious or moral objections. And sometimes I say, I fear my friends more than my enemies. I mean, in a way, Roy Blunt, Senator Blunt, is a friend. By putting in an amendment that went so far, it makes it harder to pass a kind of targeted protection for the faith-based organizations that I'm primarily concerned about. So yeah, there is debate going on, and I think this is not going to go away. You're going to hear this between now and the election in November. Both Santorum and Romney have made clear that they are opposed to what the Obama administration is attempting to do here. Obviously, President Obama will be defending it, and this will continue to be an issue. So you're here to discuss. But of course, when an issue like this gets into the political arena, I sort of cringe, because both sides then attempt to use it to beat on the other side rather than trying to find a solution to the problem. Because if you find a solution, if you follow, what I was suggesting, Melissa Rogers was talking about, the issue goes away and you no longer have a stick to beat up on the other side. So you're going to hear a lot about this, but often with more smoke than light, I'm afraid, as each side tend to polarize, and hopefully after the election, they can start talking to each other and find some way to work through this. And the basic outline is, okay, I can understand how contraceptive services are important. There are unwanted pregnancies. And if you're against abortion, as I am, you could argue you should be for contraceptives. But I also can understand, my daughter-in-law is Catholic, and I can understand her position too. And this has been a long tradition within the Catholic Church to oppose artificial birth control. And there's natural law and other reasoning. It's not a frivolous, sort of pejorative type position that the Catholic Church is. And so I can also see it as being a legitimate position, even if it's one I personally disagree with. And therefore I think it should be protected, that there should be, you need to think in terms of religious exemptions for organizations that do find this religiously like something contrary to their deeply held and sincerely held religious beliefs. I think we as a society need to live with that sort of a tension.
Why don't we cut there and give you a break? Join me in thanking Steve Monsma for a great presentation.